This happened when I was 15. During the summers, I lived with my dad in a super small town close to the Navajo reservation called St. John's. It's a town with a lot of nice people, most of which from rancher or cowboy families. The town is in the middle of the desert, the closest city being like 45 minutes away. Now, one night, my friend and I decided to prank one of our other buddies. It was dark outside, like pitch black dark. There are barely any streetlights in the town, and as a result, it's incredibly difficult to see without a flashlight. But after we pranked our friend, using window paint to write a funny message on his car, we began walking back to my friend's car. As he started opening the door, we heard something close to us on our right. We turned our heads and pointed the flashlight towards the place that we heard the noise, and about 100 feet away was a creature so foreign that my friend and I became just paralyzed with fear. The kind of afraid where your whole body tightens up so tensely that it actually hurts. This thing looked like a dog, but it was the size of like a small tiger. It was dark brown with matted fur and pitch black eyes. Imagine the werewolf from Harry Potter, but less humanoid. And it was walking when the light hit it. It moved just so strange as well. Almost as if it was unfamiliar with its body, like it was trying to decide whether or not to walk on 4 legs or 2. It slowly turned its head towards us, its eyes narrowing on ours. It stared at us for what seemed like forever, before it jolted its head into the air and just screamed. Not like your noise that you hear an animal make, but like the screech of a woman. And the creature's screams caused our paralyzed bodies to jump back into reality as we realized that we needed to leave ASAP. We jumped into my friend's car and sped away to his home, and the whole night we just sat on his bed, trying to double check with each other that we actually saw and heard all of that. When morning eventually came, I went home to my dad's house down the street. I was scared to tell him what happened because one of his only rules is that I wasn't allowed outside after 11. And when I told him, I expected him to say that I was seeing things. But to my surprise, he actually believed me. He grew up in the town and lived there almost his whole life. And my dad told me some of his own encounters with skinwalkers, which was kind of comforting for some weird reason. But my dad is incredibly religious, so he believed the skinwalkers were Native Americans that worship Satan, but now that I'm older, I realize that that's kind of racist, really. Sort of in the same way that the Indian burial ground horror stories are a bit that way too. But anyway, that's what happened. And as I've grown older, I talked to my siblings and other people in the town about what happened. It turns out as well that lots of people, my family included, have had their own encounters. I'm not really sure what to believe, but I know that I saw what I saw. When I was around 13 years old and at the shopping centre with my parents, I wanted to go off on my own and wander around by myself for a while, and so my parents agreed. After a little while, I was stopped by a woman in casual clothes, and she told me that she was an undercover cop and I was suspected of shoplifting. Because I was young, I was terrified. I didn't ask her for ID or anything like that. I just didn't know that I could even question authority. She asked to look through my bag, and I let her, insisting that I hadn't stolen anything. She asked me how old I was, who I was there with, and then she asked me something that still sends chills down my spine. Are your parents expecting you to go home with them tonight? I told her of course they were. Why wouldn't they be? She then insisted that I had to follow her to go and figure out this shoplifting thing, so I went. She was leading me towards the exit, and by the grace of God, before we got there, we luckily bumped into my dad. He asked what was going on, and I told him. As I was explaining the situation, the woman got on her phone and was talking to someone saying things like, "Oh, this isn't the right girl then, huh?" Then hangs up and says, "Sorry, wrong person," and abruptly just walks off. My dad and I just sort of stood there, dumbfounded. When my mum found out about the situation, she was really unimpressed by the way that the undercover cop handled the situation. So she took me to the center management the next day and complained to them about how I was treated by their undercover cop. When the woman answers, we don't employ undercover cops in this center. I have no idea what that woman had planned for me, but I thank my lucky stars every day that we ran into my dad. In 2019, I moved to a post-Soviet country for work, and there's this American diner that I always go to on Saturdays for lunch. It's a one-of-a-kind of place in the city, owned by this half-Cuban dude who loves the USA. Not surprisingly, too, the place attracts a lot of American expats who want to feel at home. It takes me around 25 minutes to get there walking from my apartment, but as it gets extremely cold during the winter months, I always take a taxi that drops me off next to a big mall, on the opposite side of the narrow street where the diner is. The street's actually inaccessible by car. So, it's sort of hard to describe it, but the best way to reach the restaurant's entrance is by crossing the fenced garden of an old wooden church. It's an Orthodox church from the 19th century turned into a museum. It's now surrounded by massive office buildings. The garden is small and you can cross it in like 3 minutes, and the exit gate faces the restaurant, and during the winter, snow covers it completely. So it was a Saturday morning, January if I recall correctly, and the snow was fresh on the floor. I was walking to the diner when I noticed unusual footprints in the snow, as if someone was walking in circles, back and forth and for a long period, but there was nobody around and all of the office buildings seemed to be closed. I keep walking when all of a sudden a man that was hiding behind the church reveals himself. He doesn't look hostile, but there was something extremely odd about him for sure. He's wearing baggy jeans, a dirty hoodie, and a blue cap. It was extremely cold, and his outfit was not the best for the weather, but he approaches me, smiling, and he starts walking on my side. "Hey there," in English. "Oh, hi. Where are you from? Don't be afraid, I like foreigners." The vast majority of the population there looks East Asian, so it's easy to tell that I'm not a local. But his English is surprisingly good. I keep walking in silence. "Hey, you don't need to be afraid, my friend. I'm part of the couch surfing community. I'm a nice guy. Look." He tries to show me something on his phone, maybe his couch surfing profile page or something. "Would you be willing to stay at my place?" he says. No, dude, but thank you," I say. And then he goes, "Okay, would you give me some money to buy us both a coffee then? You don't have to come with me." What the heck, right? At that moment, I was already in front of the restaurant and casually opened the door to enter. He didn't follow me. 2 weeks later, same Saturday routine, lunch at the diner and then back home. And on my way, I decided to grab a coffee at the nearby place, and as I'm walking to the shop, I feel someone following me. And it's him again, and wearing the same clothes, mind you. We make eye contact, and he starts laughing, but then he proceeds to do an extremely creepy thing. He hides behind the bus stop that has glass panels on the sides and keeps staring at me. I mean, I could still see him. He was being a complete creep on purpose as well, which was really strange. But I enter the coffee shop and tell the barista, "Hey, excuse me, but there's a guy following me out there." The girl looks at me worried and says something to the security guard. It's common to see guards in all the shops there. The guy enters the shop, and the moment the door closes behind him, the barista looks at the guard, who immediately removes him from this place. They were so fast, in fact, that it almost seemed as if maybe they knew this guy. Thankfully, I never saw him again after that. But, man, what a weird encounter. So I'm a sheriff's deputy in a fairly busy county, and along with this job comes the unfortunate familiarity with what a decomposing human body smells like. To me, it's very similar to an animal carcass, but with a much more sweeter odor. Not sweet in the sense that I enjoy it. Heck no. That smell normally means a bad night for me, in fact, and another gruesome memory to add to my catalogue of things that I would rather forget. But anyway, with that out of the way, I'll get to what happened. So last night I was patrolling a geographically isolated area of the county, which is a very large and sparsely populated place. Having completed the hour-long trek to the northwestern county line, I began driving through the mountains back towards civilization. About 25 miles from town, or the closest semblance thereof, I hit a straight stretch of highway through a wide valley. Since the weather was nice, I had my windows rolled down, and as I passed the entrance of an old logging road, that familiar smell of sweet rot suddenly just filled my car. Not just a whiff as well, but a cloud of it filled the cab as if there was a weak old human corpse sitting in the front seat next to me. It was all too familiar, but this time there was something else that I just couldn't place. It lingered for a few moments and then went away just as quickly as it had entered. Realizing what I had just smelled, my heart sank and I pulled to the side of the road. I told myself that it was just a dead animal in the ditch and that my mind was playing tricks on me. I turned my car around and drove slowly back towards the logging road. The closer I got, the smell became stronger and I grew more certain that I was about to find another body. Holding onto a shred of hope that I was wrong though, I parked my unit on the side of the highway just before the dirt road. I radioed to dispatch, told them my location and that I would be out of my unit for a moment. I didn't say why to avoid an awkward disregard on a possible body on the side of the road, but I shone my flashlight into the ditch and into the encroaching briars and weeds as I walked closer to where I believed the source of the smell was. Once I was a few yards away from the dirt road, I saw the opening of a concrete culvert going under the highway. At this point, the smell was nearly as strong as it was when I had first passed it. The opening of this place was about, I would say, 3 feet in diameter, just large enough to hide a body inside. I cursed and held my breath as I leaned over and shined my light inside. But when I did, it was just an empty tunnel stretching the width of the highway. Somewhat relieved, I must admit, I just sort of stood there and looked around. It honestly smelled as if I was standing on top of whatever was emanating the odor, though. I searched around the brush for a moment, but I didn't find anything. Thinking now that the origin may be on the opposite side of the highway, I crossed to the other ditch to continue searching. But as I walked away from the other side of the road, the smell grew fainter. I stopped at the opposite end and peeked inside just to double check, but the odor was nearly gone at this point. I stood up and I checked my surroundings when I heard a crack in the brush behind me, and the smell just engulfed me and was even stronger than before. Thinking for a moment that the wind must have shifted, I froze when I realized all of a sudden that the air was dead still. Whether it was fear or something else, a shiver went down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights coming down the highway, and as the car came near, the odor seemed to move away further into the bushes towards where I had heard the crack. The car stopped, and the passenger rolled down the window and asked if I was all right. I lied, and I told him that I was. I thanked him for checking and walked briskly to my car as they drove away. And after that, I just got the heck away from there. Once I was able to get cell service, I called my friend who was patrolling the opposite side of the county. I explained what happened, trying not to let off that I was spooked. And once I was done, though, he paused for a moment, then asked about the unusual hint of something which accompanied the smell. He asked me if it was sulfur, and I put 2 and 2 together, and I must say that it definitely was that sort of sulfur smell. I asked if he thought that I had found a demon in the middle of nowhere, to which he responded with a concerned yes. A little background on this guy as well. He's the son of a missionary and has been around the world a lot. He has seen, or rather smelled this before, and told me that it was a very concerning experience. I'll admit too that this spooked me even more because his responses were very out of character for him. Also, I know from experience that this community is very resourceful and provides helpful feedback. So, what the heck do you guys think happened? Has anyone had anything even remotely similar occur to them? There's always the chance of a very scientific explanation, I know that, and I hope that one is out there that could explain it away. If you're familiar with my previous stories, then you know that I've had some other encounters in the past, which included an encounter with a possible possession. I'm open to any advice or guidance, though. I mean, I know how to fight criminals, but an evil spirit? Not so much. And to answer a question that I know is coming, yes, I will be going back there tonight when I get off work. When I was about 14 or 15 years old, my friend was having a birthday party at her house. It was only just girls until my boyfriend and another boyfriend of my friend's attending the birthday girls' party insisted that we leave her house and walk to the local high school closer to her house to meet them so that we could continue hanging out and have some fun with them. It was around 2 in the morning when we were walking down a straight main road that eventually led to the high school, when all of a sudden, this hillbilly, probably 40-something years old, guy drives past us, slows down, stops and backs up to me and my two friends that went on this walk. He stops right in front of us, gets out of his car, walks up to the three of us and asks us what pretty young things are doing out so late like this. Me, being the most clever or perhaps the most stupid and brave, replied to him with some bullcrap story about how our friends were having a party and they started drinking, so we got uncomfortable and wanted to go to my house for the rest of the early morning. And after I told him that, he just stood there with his hands in his pockets, sort of eyeing each of us up and down, all whilst looking back at his truck a few times. My friends and I definitely knew that he was trying to figure out which one of us would be easiest to grab and throw into his truck. I was the smallest of my two other friends, mind you, and he kept making eye contact with me over the other two friends. He just stood there, eyeing us for what felt like forever, but was probably more like a couple of minutes. He eventually asked us if we wanted a ride home, or if just I wanted him to take me home. We replied that we were almost home anyway, and we didn't need or want a ride. And then he just stood there eyeing us up and down again for another minute or so, deciding what to do, I think. And he eventually got back into his truck without saying a word to any of us. When he drove off and was far enough away for us to start running, we jumped the small fence lining the high school and we ran across the field to the tennis courts, where we were startled by my boyfriend, my friend's boyfriend, and another guy friend of ours. We told them what just happened, and we walked over to an alley that was at the end of the school that led back to the sidewalk in the main road that we had just been walking on. I heard some screeching tires and a car speeding as fast as they could back up the road, and we saw that it was that guy again that we had just encountered, speeding directly back to where me and my friends were just walking. He stopped his truck, got out, and was walking around, looking like he was searching, most likely for my friends and I would guess. But we all hid in some nearby bushes as he patrolled the sidewalk up and down, and after a few minutes of searching for us, he got back into his truck and sped off in the opposite direction from which he came. We all ran to the other side of the school and took some inner neighborhood streets to get to my friend's boyfriend's house to make sure that he couldn't find us if he was still on the hunt. We assumed, too, that he came back around as fast as he could because he finally made the decision to pick one of us up and take off with us to do as he pleased, or whatever he had planned. And all I can say is that I thank God that we dodged that creep that night, because it could have all ended very differently. So I'm quarantined with my mum. We're both avoiding going out when possible because we're both compromised, so we just sort of take short trips for any errands that we need to complete in order to not go stir crazy. Today she needed to get some gas and we needed a few groceries too, so we both went. We saw my cousin at the gas station, and after I went to one of the pumps, I said hello while my mum went to pay for her gas. After she paid, I started pumping the gas, and we all just sort of stood there chatting for a moment. And when my cousin returned to the car, a man came out of the gas station. He was balding, unkempt, a patchy short beard and old glasses, the kind you see on high school photos from the 80s. He was wearing a sort of tropical shirt with a notepad and a pen in the pocket, and dirty car keys and a tan jacket. He stopped at my cousin's car and talked to her. She's kind of small, so I stood there watching until she got in the car safely and I heard it start. My mum and I were pumping the last bit of gas into the car. Both of us didn't need to do it, but we were both just glad to be outside for a moment. The guy walked over to us while she was finishing up and said, "Are you having fun?" We just kind of glanced at each other and my mum said, "Uh-huh," and swatted me to make me go to my side of the car. I didn't go, though. I didn't want to until she was in the car herself. And then the guy turned to me and said, "Are you having fun with your granddaughter?" As if he were trying to make a joke, but his facial expressions never changed. I just kind of gave him a bit of a blank stare and said, "That's my mum." I squeezed between him and the bumper and moved to my side of the car. He followed closely and said, "I just came here from Michigan. I've been here for 10 years. I got in and held onto my door. He stared at where I was holding the door and then at my face again. I was giving him the blank stare and said, "That's nice." And then my dog stuck his nose out and began barking at this guy. He's a 15-pound Yorkie and usually sweet, but sounded like an angry guard dog while he was barking this time. "Is the dog having fun?" the guy asked. I held onto the door tighter and said, "I guess so. Have a nice day." I closed the door quickly, locked it, and my mum just drove off. My cousin drove after us. She'd been watching the entire time as well, waiting for either us or the guy to leave. My mum and I both remarked that the guy was super creepy, and we both thought that he may have been trying to jump in the car. I'm really glad that I went with her today. So about 2 years ago, my little cousin Jaden was 4 years old, and her family moved into a new house and started renovating it. Everything was fine too for a while until one day Jaden, out of pretty much nowhere, just started telling her mum how she could see 2 kids in a room. And if that wasn't creepy enough, the kids had no face. I guess it either looked smeared or just blank or something, and they also had no arms apparently. My aunt was creeped out, obviously, but she kind of brushed it off and thought that maybe it was just imagination. My cousin started bringing them up more and more, though, telling more and more details about them. One was a boy and the other is a girl. They told her that they wanted her to play with them. Jaden said that they were nice to her, but then they started to scare her. I would have been scared from the beginning, but whatever. But she would wake up in the middle of the night screaming because she was so frightened by them. My aunt didn't know what to do. My cousin would be playing, and when my aunt asks what she's doing, she would just say playing with the kids. I guess that they were only mean sometimes. But it still gets a little more creepy. So besides there being 2 faceless and armless kids in her room, there was also an old man with a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, as she explained him. And this man was a mean man, and Jaden was very scared of him. She said that the 2 little kids were also scared of him, but the thing is that the man was only allowed on the porch. He wasn't allowed to come inside since he was so mean, so as long as my cousin was inside, she felt okay. And one night, the family was eating dinner, and they started to hear footsteps outside on the porch. The door is right beside the table, and my uncle went to see if somebody was out there. He came back and said that he didn't see anything, but Jaden, with a very straight face, was just like, "It's the mean man. He's standing at the door watching us, Dad." Of course, my aunt and uncle were freaked out, like, what the heck just happened? But then she said, "It's okay, he can't come inside." That was a span of about 6 months, and a few months later they moved, and Jaden never talked about the kids or the old man ever again. Quite honestly, too, I'm not even sure if she remembers it, but I don't want to ask. I'm pretty sure that it was very scary for her at such a young age. And my aunt did some research about the house and saw an old man who wore cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, used to live there, and actually died on the property. She could never find out about the kids, though, which was really strange. My cousin has a few more creepy experiences too, so if you like this story, then be sure to leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll see if I can get them for you. But for now, I hope you enjoyed. My grandma's house is really old. It was built in 1880, and my grandma grew up in this house, and she raised my dad there as well. My grandma and I were very close. She was a movie buff and passed that interest along to me. My sister was always more fond of my mum's parents, but they died when I was like 10, and they had been fighting cancer for like 4 years. So I didn't have many good experiences with them, which was kind of sad. But anyways, fast forward to 2007, I'm 17, and now my grandma is dying. Crohn's disease and leukemia have really taken their toll on her. My grandma passes away at home, peacefully, thankfully, and my dad inherits this house and its payments. But unwilling to just give it back to the bank, my sister and her new husband decide to move in and make the payment so that my dad didn't have to. We all helped clean out all of Grandma's old stuff, except the basement. All that was really left down there, though, was some old canning and jarring stuff. My grandma liked to make her own jams and jellies. But eager to get out on my own, I moved out of my parents' house and in with my sister and brother-in-law. A couple of years go by, and my sister says that she sees some stuff and hears things at times. Neither me or my brother-in-law ever did. Mind you, I'm really not the supernatural, paranormal type sort of person, and generally I'm pretty skeptical. But eventually they get pregnant and decide the house is too old to try and update and baby-proof, so they decide to move out. So now it's just me and the 2 cats. After some time, my girlfriend moves in with me too. She's very superstitious and would often tell me that she hears things like footsteps from upstairs. We stayed in a small bedroom on the main floor because the upstairs of the house had the poorest insulation ever, and if it was cold outside, it was pretty much freezing up there, vice versa in the summer as well. But being the skeptical person that I was, I always had some sort of an explanation for what she heard. Maybe it was Chaz. My sister's cat Chaz was huge. She easily weighed like 25 pounds and had a very heavy step for a cat, and was not graceful at all, and she liked to sort of sneak upstairs. So to me, it just all sort of added up. But one night, while at work, just down the road a few hundred yards, I get a picture from my girlfriend, and super excited that it might be a nude. You can imagine my confusion when it's a picture of the cats, both on the bed with her staring intently at the doorway. The text reads, "Someone's in the basement, come home now." I work so close to home that I couldn't even hit 60 miles per hour before I got to the driveway, but that didn't stop me from trying that night though. The house has 2 doors, the one in the front that we never used and the one in the back that we always used. The one in the back led into the house and into the basement though, so I used the front door and I went into the room, quickly retrieved my .45 from the closet and told her to call the police. It was a short walk from the bedroom to the stairs to the basement, but the combination of fear and adrenaline made it feel like hours to get there. All the while, I can hear this menacing racket downstairs. It sounded like someone was frantically searching for someone, or maybe an animal that got in there somehow and was desperately trying to escape. The commotion was just so intense that I could feel it in the floor, in fact. Whatever was happening down there was super messed up, and I did not want to be dealing with this. But I finally made it to the upper landing, and the lights in the stairs and the basement were already on. So instantly, the animal theory was dismissed for something much worse. I thought to myself that if there's a guy down there, then I'm going to have to kill him. And this was definitely the worst nightmare scenario territory that I've ever been in. Suddenly, though, the sound of a big shelf crashing to the ground breaks my concentration, and without even thinking, I level my pistol down the hallway. I shouted, "Come out slowly with your hands up, or I'm going to have to kill you." But my command was met with silence. Nothing. No sound. Maybe there was some sort of ambient noise, but my heart was beating so hard and fast that I couldn't hear anything else. A moment passes, and there's literally no other exit but the stairs, so I decide that aggression is my only option. So I hurry down the stairs and begin clearing the basement, ready to pull slugs into anyone that I might find. But when I do, there's just no one. It's not a big basement too, and there's really nowhere to hide. After a thorough sweep as well, I start noticing things, weird things. Like, where's the mess? All that noise, but nothing's out of place? What about the shelf that I just heard crash to the floor? Still up against the wall where it belonged. And when I say nothing, I mean absolutely nothing had been disturbed. I've never, ever felt so confused in my entire life. There's just no way with what I just heard that anything could have been intact down there, but here I was, and nothing. The adrenaline sapped from my body and turned my legs to absolute jello, and I just sort of slumped against the wall, bewildered at the sight of the basement untouched. A couple of moments later, and the police arrived. We all looked around in the basement and outside, but we couldn't find any sign of an intruder or an escape or anything. In the end, they tell us to call again if anything else happened, but it never did. As a matter of fact, I never experienced anything else ever again in that house. But I did move out about a year later in 2010. So, to this day, I still have no explanation for what happened that night. I don't necessarily think that it was a ghost or anything. Like I said, I literally saw nothing. No voices, cold spots, no apparitions, nothing. But I definitely heard something impossible.